Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. In tonight's episode, we're very lucky to have a special guest, and that's Rune from the MakerDAO project, one of the founder. So thanks for coming on, Rune.
Uh,
This
Thanks,
is a
Aaron.
pretty special project. It's a big problem that a lot of people are sort of struggling to get their head around. About what is a stable coin, and this is very different and more complex in a good way compared to US dollar tether. So we'll jump in and talk about all that. But do you first want to talk about how you got into crypto and the project itself, Ryan?
Sure. So I first got into Bitcoin in 2011 when I just randomly saw it on the internet, and I immediately got completely hooked on the whole idea of cryptocurrency and a lot of new online sovereignty created by this kind of technology. And then from Bitcoin, I discovered BitShares, which is one of the early smart contracts and like advanced blockchain 2.0 projects, which is also the project that invented the first stablecoins. And then eventually, I just realized that Ethereum was this new emergent ecosystem, and what it really needed for the ecosystem to grow and to facilitate trade on the blockchain would be kind of like the core features, or some of the core features that BitShares had. So that's really what Maker ended up being, is like taking like the technology of BitShares, but also improving it quite significantly and sort of finishing the thought on how to really do those things right. And then putting it on Ethereum smart contracts and setting it up in such a way that it is totally compatible with all the other Ethereum stuff.
So there's a couple of things to talk about. So Maker itself is the token or the project you're sort of investing in, or the company, whereas the DAI is the stable coin that you guys are creating. I'll let you describe it, but it's basically trying to balance its value against other tokenized assets. Might let you take the reins from there a little bit, mate.
Yeah, so DAI is a stablecoin. Yeah, it's like a cryptocurrency with price stability. And it maintains price stability through two primary mechanisms. So on one hand, it uses so incentive schemes, essentially, like crypto-economic incentives, to directly adjust the price of the asset in the market, basically to guarantee that over time the price of the asset in the market remains stable instead of like going to the moon or something, or falling to nothing, because we are able to adjust the incentives for holding DAI, and if you get more holders, then you can press the price up, right? Because supply and demand, and at the same time we can also adjust incentives for generating DAI, which results in changes to the supply side.
And I was just going to say, so yeah, very basic economics. If the price starts to go up at all, there's ways that you can increase the supply to bring that back down, and vice versa. And that's what keeps the stable coin at a stable value. And this is obviously, there's a huge market need for this, mate. So sorry, I'll let you continue.
Yes, and then to sort of actually guarantee this price that we are calculating, we are setting in the market with these incentives. We make sure that for all stablecoin outstanding, there is even more collateral locked on the blockchain that guarantees its value and sort of is the whole basis for the circulating supply of DAI in the market.
So if I have one Ethereum, and if I want one Ethereum's worth of DAI, stable token, for whatever reason, if I think there's volatility coming, or I want to sit on the sidelines rather than using US dollar tether, which a lot of people have issues with, I can collateralize that with more than one Ethereum's worth. More than one Ethereum to have one Ethereum's worth of DAI, and the Maker token holders vote on how much more than 100% that should be. Is that right? At the risk of, if the asset falls in value and all that sort of thing is taken into account with that algorithm that you're writing for the DAI. Is that correct?
Yes, that's how the token is generated. But actually, it's really crucial to understand that There are different. There are basically there's two main types of users for like the DAI mechanism itself. So on one hand, there's the holders. There are people who just want to hold DAI, like who just want stability. And the way you go from, let's say you have one ETH you just have one ETH cryptocurrency, and you want to turn that into a stable asset using DAI. The way you do that is just you go to the market and you buy DAI with your ETH, and it's that simple. You just like buy it and you hold it, and there's no more to it.
Okay.
The other end of the other side of the interaction is if you want to generate DAI. But so interestingly, generating DAI actually means that you don't want it, kind of, which is somewhat unintuitive. And sometimes people believe that that's how you sort of use the stable part of the system. But actually, it's the opposite. Generating DAI is if you believe that the asset you're using as collateral will increase in value relative to DAI, because after you generate DAI, you end up with an equivalent debt. So for instance, if you have, let's say, $100 worth of debt backed by a number of ETH, and then you have, like, you created $100 worth of DAI out of that. This DAI is then something you are going to go and sell out on the market to someone who's seeking stability, and they will end up with the DAI. So they will sort of have this. They will sort of end up with the stability taken out of your ETH, and you will end up with additional ETH. So now you have a leverage position where you have extra exposure, equivalent to that additional 100 debt.
So as you just touched on, then there's a few ways to use this, but one of those is by that mechanism. You can actually create leveraged positions rather than using exchanges, and the borrowing rates are going to be far more attractive, from what I understand. Is that correct? Yes,
the rates will be really good because it's kind of like a margin trading platform that sources its capital directly from a money market, right? So like you're borrowing money, or sort of like deploying capital directly from people who are just using the token as cash.
Yep.
So actually we plan to basically offer this to exchanges, right? We want all the exchanges to integrate this into their system. So it should be available everywhere basically, and should just mean that there's going to be lower rates, better availability for margin trading in the future.
Cool. Okay. So what are the sort of main big use cases? Because I know for me, the way that I'm thinking about this is in the future, as the whole world becomes more tokenized and real assets are put on the blockchain, we can start to use, tokenized gold. So as another mechanism, rather than just having Bitcoin, Ethereum, and cryptocurrencies that are stabilizing the value of the DAI, we can have all sorts of assets. So that if there was a correction in cryptocurrencies, then there's more things stabilizing the value of that DAI. So for you, the market cap of DAI and Maker in the future can expand greatly when we get these big financial players and institutions get on board, and they're going to want some stability. They're not going to be wanting to sit in like a US dollar tether, or if Bitcoin's gone up a lot and all that sort of thing. Is that what you see the main use case of this going forward?
Yeah, to some degree. So I do think that it's not that like institutional traders or like newcomers to the space are not going to want to use something like tokenized fiat, for instance, or even Bitcoin or any other of the popular digital assets. I think all of this will become just increasingly popular. DAI specifically will be optimized for the use case of sort of being the kind of like the asset sort of in the middle between everything. So like everything else can be traded all over space, and then DAI is sort of optimized to be kind of like the link between the other assets. And that's also why we just say it's stable. It has like it just has like a price that is actually calculated according to like economic data to just have like an optimal volatility against.
Okay, so a reserve currency and an intermediary between all things cryptocurrency and the real world almost. So depending on how big the market cap of crypto gets, that market cap of DAI can expand greatly. That's correct?
Yeah, definitely. And one use case that we are looking at in the short term is as being sort of the liquidity link for fiat remittance transactions. So that's actually what we really like. That's sort of what we base our monetary policy on. Essentially, is that we try to hit a point where you get the best possible sort of price for going from one fiat currency to another through DAI. So like going from the Korean won to DAI to Japanese yen should be really cheap and fast.
That makes sense as well. Now I've read all the white papers and I've chatted to you, and this is still a pretty hard concept to get your head around, but I think it is fascinating and how it's all going to work and bring stability to this very volatile crypto world. So I think that's the DAI explained pretty well. Do you want to start to talk about the Maker token and the project, so the governance that will give to people? Because the DAI isn't for investing in, that should be stable in price in theory. So the Maker is what actual investors might be interested in.
Yeah, so Maker is actually the first DAO, like way earlier. You know, it's one of the first 5 projects or something on Ethereum, long before the DAO was ever conceived. And yeah, it's always been designed to be a fully autonomous, just like decentralized platform controlled by a whole bunch of people all over the world through their tokens, through voting. And there are 2 primary incentives for why the DAO sort of functions, and the MKR token is interesting. And first of all, it's because it's like the token you need to gain access to the advanced mechanism of the system. So when you generate DAI by locking collateral into the system, you accrue a stability fee, as it's called. So a fee will sort of accrue over time on your position. And you can only pay this fee with the MKR token. So that creates sort of this inherent demand and like utility for this token and reason for it to exist. So if there's lots of demand for DAI in the system, there's also going to be increased demand for generating DAI, because the incentives will then like switch it towards making it better to generate. And then there's going to be increased demand for MKR, because people will need that to pay the fees with. And then MKR holders, they they vote to actually set the rules of the game, so to speak. Like they set all the various risk parameters, as we call them, which determine all sorts of like characteristics about how you can actually generate DAI.
So from my understanding, that's something like Ethereum might be a less risky asset than some ICO or very small coin. If you want to create DAI and get stablecoin, that's obviously a lot risky. So we need bigger margins for error to keep stability. Is that sort of how it all works, on how the token holders vote on the risk parameters for each coin or tokenized asset?
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually like the important thing is that it needs to be sort of an open source process, like an open thing, as we call it, which is really the big difference between Maker and traditional finance, is that it's all about sort of utilizing wisdom of the crowd to have this scientific discussion in the community, essentially, where people like openly debate all the various quantitative reasoning and facts about the different assets on Ethereum that's available to use collateral. And then based on this discussion, we set these risk parameters, as you're saying, right? Like something that's more risky should have more strict risk parameters. Something that's like liable to fall quickly, and we need, if it falls like very quickly, we need to like guarantee that the over collateralization is like high, right? So it'll fall, but it'll still be above the minimum, like the extra collateral requirement. And then, so what's absolutely crucial about this whole governance process and the MKR token that votes for it, and the people who hold the MKR token who are participating in the process and contributing to it, is that if it fails somehow, like if it's set wrong and there is, like, let's say it should have been this in terms of over collateralization, but they set it to this and it then falls below, that's like the worst case scenario for the system, right? It is that there's what's called under collateralization, right? We refer to that as a black swan event sometimes because, it's supposed to be very unlikely to happen, assuming governance does its job right. But what then happens when there is under collateralization because of, to some degree, that means the risk parameters were set wrong. And actually, the system just automatically forces MKR holders to bail out the shortfall in this scenario. So if there's like let's say $100,000 worth of DAI missing out of the system, new MKR is just printed autonomously on the blockchain, just like get printed and it gets sold off immediately to raise $100,000 worth of DAI, which then like balances it out, right? So like it fixes the books and means that everything is backed completely as it's supposed to be, and there's no shortfall or like instability in the system. And this happens immediately all the time. So anytime there's any sort of like under collateralization, the system immediately prints MKR to recapitalize that in an instant, guaranteeing that the system is over collateralized.
So if they're punished if the system runs badly, but probably the more likely scenario, what we hope for as investors, if this all runs well, it becomes more widely used, how do the rewards work? So how do the Maker tokens go up in value, or is there sort of a dividend, or how would you describe that reward mechanism built in?
Yeah, so there's no sort of explicit reward mechanism. There's no dividend or cash flow to the asset. What there is this hard-coded requirement that when you pay fees in the system, you have to pay it with MKR. This is kind of similar to paying gas with ETH. And it means that if the system is popular and lots of people are using it, there's just this inherent demand created for the MKR token. And so there's both going to be increased demand when they want to go out and buy it in the market because they want to use the system. And the supply will actually also decrease, because when you pay the fees, you are permanently destroying the MKR you pay the fees with. And this sort of counterbalances that when there's trouble in the system, it inflates the MKR supply, and when everything's going well, this MKR supply will decrease over time.
I think I'm finally starting to get my head right around this, mate, and I think this is a great option that a lot of people are going to use and like. So do you want to maybe wrap it up with where you see this all going ideally? I know you've been working really hard behind the scenes for the past 6 to 12 months or so, but where are you finally ready to sort of launch this more into the public spectrum now, and where do you see this going in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, we are planning to really start to ramp up our marketing efforts and just sort of appear in the community, since we've been in stealth mode this whole time. And so we were recently at DevCon, the entire Maker team of more than 20 people went to DevCon, and Andy, who is our technical lead, was doing several presentations there, including one revealing essentially our DAI launch system that we are going to release here in December, and that's like completely ready for mainstream use, and it's like the first version of the code base that we've been working on for 3 years. So our plan is to aggressively expand that and really change the landscape of Ethereum, because now there'll suddenly be like a consumer grade stablecoin for everyone to use, and then we will just continuously improve that and like iterate both on the core mechanism, both like we will be upgrading DAI. We'll also be building a lot of, well, really crazy stuff you can basically do once you have a stablecoin. Like that really like completely changes the possibilities that's available in Ethereum, because you can start, you just like have a lot of sort of financial things that can be done once you have a stable asset as the base that you can use as collateral for other things. So we'll be experimenting with that, and we'll just like continuously be improving it over time.
And I'm going to do plenty of follow-up videos, guys, as we get more updates from the team. So keep an eye out for those. I'm also going to throw a video up on how you can get your hands on some Maker, because it is hard to use that Oasis decentralized exchange if you're not used to those. I think it's also on Ether Delta at the moment. Is that right, Root?
Yeah. So there's going to be more trading on Ether Delta, and So Oasis is our own decentralized exchange that we just built in-house a long time ago. And we are going to expand to even more exchanges coming up. And we're also going to be listed on CoinMarketCap finally, where we've sort of been staying hidden this whole time. So we really expect it to be much easier to get to interact with.
Just finally, a question I do get a lot is the supply of total supply of 1 million. The tokens are trading around $250 at the moment. The circulating supply that's very different to what that total supply is. That's correct?
Yeah, so that's actually an interesting part of it. Is that so? There's 570,000 MKR on the market approximately. So that means about 43% of the total supply is in the developer fund. But the developer fund is actually controlled directly by the community. So that's like a voting, like an on-chain voting mechanism that will be activated alongside the launch of DAI in December. And that means the community will actually have complete control over how the remainder of the MKR funds are sort of budgeted and dispersed over time.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on, mate. I hope you guys have enjoyed this interview. As I said, I'm going to follow this project closely, and I wish you guys all the best as you launch this in the near future. So thanks for coming on, mate.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.